What is up, guys? So today's tier list, we'll be looking at every crossover episode of the Arrowverse, putting them each into the tier they deserve to be in, and in the end, rearranging the whole thing to more accurately represent my actual ranking for these episodes. Now, obviously, there are a lot more crossover episodes than what we have here, even episodes that feature the main characters of other shows and very prominent roles in those episodes, but I elected, since there are too many episodes to count, I only included the ones that are part of the annual crossovers of each year, as well as the mini Flash vs. Supergirl crossovers that they did 2 years in a row. With that out of the way, let's start the entire tier list with the first episode in this list, which is The Flash Season 1, Episode 8, which is titled Flash vs. Arrow. This episode is a lot of fun, and it did a great job at introducing to us the annual crossovers we would be getting from there on out. The concept here, which is the fight between the Flash and Arrow, it was a lot of fun, and I really like how they executed it, where they made it so that Barry was affected by the Rainbow Raider, so he became really, really angry. I really liked the conflict there, although it wasn't obviously real conflict. It felt real, and I think that it came from somewhere real, and I really like how they did that. I think that this crossover also has a lot of great fight scenes, and although these two-parter episodes aren't very connected at all, it's really just Oliver and Barry teaming up in two separate cases. Still though, for this episode alone, I think it is pretty great and definitely worth the A tier. The second part of the first annual crossover, which is Arrow Season 3, Episode 8, titled The Brave and the Bold, is certainly not as good as the Flash vs. Arrow. The concept is definitely not as interesting. It's just really Oliver and Barry teaming up on a mission, which is obviously a lot of fun, and it's a great episode, but I don't think it's really as good as Flash vs. Arrow. Still, though, it's got a lot of great things about it. Captain Boomerang is a pretty good villain. Not incredible, but definitely not bad either. There's a lot of great fun moments. Obviously, the relationship or the friendship here between Oliver and Barry really enhances basically every scene they're in the entirety of the Arrowverse, but here as well. Because of that, I would put this episode probably in the B tier. So I just realized that I had the second part of Heroes Join Forces before the first, but speaking of that crossover, the second annual crossover of the Arrowverse is, I think, the only one that is genuinely bad. The first part of it, which is titled The Legends of Today, which is The Flash Season 2, Episode 8, is definitely not as bad. It's not bad at all, really. It's got a lot of great things about it. I think it's really enjoyable, and while Hawkman and Hawkgirl, as well as Vandal Savage, are not very good in my opinion, it doesn't really suffer from the downfalls that the next episode does, because the next episode is heavily influenced by Arrow Season 4. Anyway, I would probably put this episode in the C tier, because although it's definitely not as bad as the other episode, it's not great either, and I think the C tier is probably where it belongs. The second part of Heroes Join Forces, which is Arrow Season 4, Episode 8, titled Legends of Yesterday, is god-awful, and I just think it's terrible. The reason for that is, first of all, it does heavily focus around Hawkman, Hawkgirl, and Vandal Savage as the main villain, so that doesn't help its case at all, but also it is heavily influenced by whatever they were doing in Arrow Season 4. I don't understand why they did what they were doing, but for some reason they did. This episode may have the worst moment in the entirety of Season 4, at least one of, and is, I think, this episode contains the worst moment from Felicity ever, which is saying a hell of a lot. The moment where she goes ballistic about Oliver not telling her about the son that he literally just learned about, and also because of that, Oliver doesn't pay attention later, so Vandal Savage destroys Central City. It's so stupid, everything that's going on here. It's so difficult to watch, and I really think it's bad. This episode has some cool moments like Barry time traveling and some cool fight scenes, but overall, I think that it is easily the worst crossover episode we've seen so far, so I would put it in the F tier. So then we have Supergirl Season 1, I think Episode 17, titled World's Finest, the first mini crossover between Supergirl and Flash, although it's only the first of two. This was the first time that Supergirl connected to the Arrowverse, and that Barry went to Earth 38 and met Supergirl, and that definitely is interesting, but other than that, this episode is not great. Just like the last episode I went over, it's a part of a terrible season, and in this case being Supergirl Season 1, and it's really, really, really affected by that. I mean, the fight scenes, the dialogue, it's really, really bad on the level of Supergirl Season 1, and the Flash being there doesn't really help the dialogue or the fight scenes at all. Obviously, he does add a lot of fun to it, and I do really like the back and forth between him and Supergirl, which is one thing this episode does do well, but overall, it's not great, so I would probably put it in the D tier. So we have one episode in each tier. Will this next episode be going in the S tier? Maybe not. This episode is the first part of Invasion, which is The Flash Season 3, Episode 8. This episode was, a big portion of it was The Flash and Green Arrow going up against the rest of the heroes in that group, which was really, really cool, really exciting. Obviously, it wasn't the first time we ever saw the heroes going up against each other, which, I mean, we have The Flash versus Arrow right here, but that part of the episode was definitely pretty fun. I mean, this episode was very definitely, a lot of it was set up for the eventual conclusion to the setup that we would get in part 3 with the introduction of the Dominators, but I think it was definitely an episode that I really, really enjoyed. I mean, seeing all the heroes together in the Hall of Justice, which I don't understand why they haven't used it again, was definitely really, really cool, but I don't think it deserves to be in the S tier, so I would probably put it in the A tier. So then we have Arrow Season 5, Episode 8, titled Invasion, which is the second part of this crossover. This episode, I think, is great. I love this episode. It's got a lot of great emotional moments. It's basically a love letter to Arrow and a look at what Arrow could have been, and it was really, really, really cool. That being said, as in a crossover episode, I would get why people were annoyed by this episode, because it isn't really a crossover episode. It's more of an Arrow episode, and it doesn't really add much to the overall plot of the crossover at all. Also, I think that the side storyline with Supergirl and Flash and mainly Wild Dog isn't great, and because of both those things, it's not going to go in the S tier. But if this was just like regular episodes, not considering the fact that it is a crossover, it probably would go in the S tier, but for now, I would put it in the A tier. So then we get to the third part of the Invasion crossover, which is Legends of Tomorrow Season 2, Episode, I think, 8, which is titled Invasion. Obviously, it's the third part of that crossover. Now, this episode, although I don't think is necessarily the best episode out of the three, I think it's definitely the best crossover episode, as again, the second part is definitely not a great crossover episode, but definitely a great episode. This episode, however, is a lot of fun. I think that was at the time the closest we've ever gotten to the Justice League, and has only ever been surpassed in the feeling of the Justice League being on the little screen, on the small screen, by the first part of Elseworlds, which I will get to later. But this episode is a lot of fun to see the heroes coming together, looking like the Justice League, to face off against the Dominators. It was really, really cool. However, I don't really like the time travel aspect of this episode. I don't really know why they added there. I feel like it was literally just because this is an episode of Legends of Tomorrow, and also they kind of wanted to pad the runtime, because I really don't think this episode needed it. It didn't really make much sense in terms of the paradox of it all, and how they, going back in time, caused the Dominators to come to Earth, and in turn that caused them to go back in time. I don't like that aspect of this episode, but overall it's a very, very fun episode, and a great crossover episode that I think also deserves to be in the A tier, but probably the top of it. So next up, we have The Flash, Season 3, Episode 17, titled Duet, which is definitely the most controversial crossover the Arrowverse has done yet, and has a very low rating on IMDb, which I understand because people, including myself, don't really like musical episodes, at least in superhero shows, because that's just not why we're here. That's not why we're watching the show, not to see a musical. At this point, I'm pretty sure Arrow is the only show in the Arrowverse to not do a musical episode. I don't think Supergirl has done one, but here in Duet, that kind of counts because she is a part of it, and also Legends of Tomorrow did one recently in the last season, and I understand I hate musical episodes, but I think this episode is definitely a lot of fun, and I think that although it doesn't need to be a musical, and it shouldn't have been a musical, and it's a shame we didn't get a more interesting mini crossover in this episode, I still think it's kind of fun, and has a pretty good main villain in the Music Meister. Still though, I don't think I'd put it any higher than the C tier. You know what, I think I'm actually going to move it down to the D tier, but I'm definitely going to put it higher than this one. Anyway, next up we have Supergirl Season 3, Episode 8, titled Crisis on Earth X Part 1, which I think is a very, very good episode. I think that it's a great start to this crossover. I thought that Barry and Iris' wedding was a great way to bring together all these characters without it feeling a little bit forced, which I think it has in the past, especially in Heroes Join Forces, where it just didn't make any sense that they went to Team Flash. They were like, oh, they have magic. Well, it was so stupid. Anyway, I'm not talking about that episode, I'm talking about this one, where I think they very, very naturally brought together all these characters for the event. The fight in the church is great. It's a lot of fun. It looks really cool. As a whole, this is a very good episode, a very good crossover episode, and a great start to Crisis on Earth X, so I would put it in the A tier. So then we have Arrow Season 6, Episode 8, titled Crisis on Earth X Part 2, which I think that it's good. It's definitely good. It's got a lot of great fun moments, and there are a lot of great fight scenes as well, but it's definitely not as good as Part 1 or like so far of this crossover. I think that it's definitely bogged down by a lot of really, really stupid moments. for some reason, basically every time we have a crossover, the Arrow episode is bogged down by a lot of stupid moments, especially like drama, and especially with Felicity Smoke. I think this episode is bogged down a little bit by that character, not as much as this episode, but definitely just a little bit. That being said, this episode is still great. It's got a lot of really, really fun moments, so I would probably put it in the B tier. Then we have Crisis on Earth X Part 3, which is The Flash Season 4, Episode 8, which I think is definitely the best or my favorite episode of this crossover. It takes place mostly on Earth X, which obviously adds a very interesting element to it. It makes it a little bit more unique. I think that this episode has a lot of great CGI fight scenes, or one big great CGI fight scene. It's got a lot of great moments. It's, I think, a very, very good episode, and my favorite of the Crisis on Earth X crossover, but still, I think it deserves to be in the A tier. So then we have Crisis on Earth X Part 4, which is Legend of Tomorrow Season 3, Episode 8. This episode is a lot of fun. It's got a lot of great scenes, a lot of great fight scenes. It looks really cool, and it's a great ending to the crossover. It's also got a great emotional scene for Martin Stein's death. That being said, the ending of this episode cribbles it below the A tier. Could have been S tier, probably A tier, but it's going to be lower than that because of the final scene, which begins with Barry and Iris getting officially married, which I think is a great way to end a crossover that began with their marriage. But then Felicity decides to interrupt, which is a huge dick move, and then Oliver and Felicity officially get married. And obviously, I hated that moment. It was the worst moment of the entirety of the crossover, and probably the second worst moment in any crossover ever, after Felicity's stupid, terrible moment in the second part of Heroes Join Forces. But because of that, this episode is not going to be any higher than the B tier. So then we have the first part of Elseworlds, which is The Flash Season 5, Episode 9, which is, at this point, my favorite crossover episode yet. The body swap between Barry and Oliver is so entertaining. It was such a genius move. Not only does it very naturally bring the two characters together for a crossover, less so Supergirl, but, I mean, it kind of works still because the other universes aren't affected, but I think it was a great way to bring together Oliver and Supergirl and the Flash for this crossover. It's so entertaining. It's so much fun watching Barry be the Green Arrow with his personality, watching Oliver be the Flash with his personality. It's so much fun. And then, of course, Superman is involved, and the four of these characters, the Flash, Green Arrow, Supergirl, and Superman especially, joining the team, it really feels like the Justice League, which is also helped by the fact that they are fighting one of the most famous Justice League villains, which is Amazo. This fight scene at the end is so much fun, and like I said earlier, is the closest we've ever gotten to feeling like the Justice League is on screen, and because of that, Elseworlds Part 1, I think, belongs in the S tier. So then we have Arrow Season 7, Episode 9, which is Elseworlds Part 2. This episode continues Elseworlds Part 1, and while it's not as good, it's definitely really, really good. The body swap is still there. It's so entertaining, and I think that Supergirl really adds to the Trinity in this episode so much more than she's ever done in the past, making these three feel really, really entertaining, and it was just so much fun. The fact that they visit Gotham City and all the references to Batman, the first mentioning of Batman ever, it's so cool because of how much build-up towards Batman the Arrowverse has had. I've made several videos about it. My most popular videos on this channel are all about the references to Batman in the Arrowverse, so to see them finally acknowledge the existence of Batman and even visit Gotham City and Arkham Asylum is so much fun, and it's so cool to watch. Obviously, Batwoman was introduced in this episode, and I feel like this is going to be her best episode ever going forward because the TV show doesn't look good, and she was kind of cool in this episode. Also, the ending with the Monitor is so cool. This episode overall is such a great episode that also I think deserves to be in the S tier. So, finishing off this tier list is Supergirl Season 4, Episode 9, which is Elseworlds Part 3, the final crossover that we've gotten so far, and obviously, it's not the last, but the final, like, the latest one. Anyway, this episode I don't think is nearly as good as the first two parts of this crossover. I don't think it really holds up to the other two parts, just because it doesn't have the body swap. I mean, that is a huge, huge part of why this episode isn't as good, but also, it's got a lot of great, like, really, really stupid moments, specifically Barry and Kara running around the world for no reason in the most illogical way possible that doesn't make any sense. That was really, really stupid, but also there are some awesome moments like Oliver confronting the Monitor about sparing Kara and Supergirl and the Flash, and also him shooting the book at the end with this cosmic Arrow, all those things were so cool, as well as the Crisis tease at the end. But overall, I think the lack of the body swap and a lot of stupid moments make this, it doesn't really hold up to the first two parts, and because of that, I would put it probably in the A tier. It's got a lot of great moments, even though it's definitely not perfect. So I rearranged the tier list to more accurately represent my actual ranking, which is Legends of Today in the F tier, World's Finest as well, actually no, Legends of Yesterday, it's so confusing. Anyway, World's Finest as well as Duet in the D tier. Then you have Legends of Today in the C tier, Crisis on Earth X Part 4, Crisis on Earth X Part 2, and The Brave and the Bold in the B tier. Invasion, which is Part 1, Elseworlds Part 3, Crisis on Earth X Part 1, the second part of Invasion, Crisis on Earth X Part 3, Flash vs. Arrow, and the third part of Invasion are all in the A tier, with Elseworlds Part 2 and Elseworlds Part 1 both being in the S tier. Hopefully with the next crossover, maybe the standard will be a little bit higher. Elseworlds Part 1 and 2 could maybe go down to the A tier, and then all 5 episodes of Crisis on Infinite Earths could be in the S tier. That would be ideal, but as you see right now, is something you really don't see very often in these tier list videos, which is a high concentration in the A tier or above. Most of the time, they're really scattered the entirety of the thing, but it really shows how good these crossovers typically are. The only bad ones are Heroes Join Forces as well as the Supergirl Flash ones, and those are the only ones under the B tier. There are some good episodes in the B tier, some great episodes in the A tier, and some awesome episodes in the S tier, really showing how they typically do pull off these crossover episodes, which is why I am really excited for Crisis on Infinite Earths, or at least partially why I think they will pull it off. Anyway, let me know what your list is in the comments down below, and if you want more tier list videos, then let me know what other tier lists you think I should do in the comments. If you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe.